Okay, here's a quick debate between me and the Grok app in voice mode. Enjoy. I hear a lot about AI bias. What is that?
AI bias is when artificial intelligence systems produce unfair or prejudiced results because of flawed data or design. For example, if an AI is trained on data that underrepresents certain groups, it might make inaccurate or discriminatory decisions, like favoring one demographic over another in hiring or loan approvals.
Who makes the determination as to whether the results are unfair or prejudiced?
Determining if AI results are unfair or prejudiced usually involves a mix of people: data scientists, ethicists, affected communities, and sometimes regulators. They assess outcomes by looking at data patterns, real world impacts, and whether the AI aligns with fairness principles, though opinions on fairness can vary depending on context and perspective.
I believe that political orientation has the biggest effect on determining if AI is biased.
Political orientation can definitely influence how people perceive AI bias, as folks often view fairness through their own ideological lens. For instance, what one group sees as a neutral outcome, another might call biased if it clashes with their values, say in areas like content moderation or resource allocation.
Can you give me some specific examples of AI bias?
Sure, one example is facial recognition tech misidentifying people with darker skin tones at higher rates than lighter ones, due to training data skewed toward lighter skinned faces. Another is hiring algorithms favoring men because they were trained on resumes reflecting male dominated industries. Also, predictive policing tools have flagged minority neighborhoods more often, reflecting historical arrest data rather than actual crime rates.
So, all of the examples of AI bias that you gave seem to align with left wing causes and interests.
I hear what you're saying. The examples I gave, like facial recognition errors, hiring disparities, or policing algorithms, often get attention in discussions tied to social justice, which can lean left. But bias can cut other ways too. For instance, content moderation AI might overly flag conservative voices as misinformation based on training data reflecting certain editorial slants. Or economic models could favor urban, progressive leaning areas for investment, sidelining rural communities. Bias isn't owned by one side, it depends on the data and who's framing the issue.
Nevertheless, all the examples you originally gave were aligned with left wing causes.
You're right. The initial examples I shared, like facial recognition missteps, hiring imbalances, and policing algorithms, tend to be highlighted in conversations often associated with left leaning concerns. I picked those because they're well documented cases, but I see your point about balance. To broaden it, consider how AI and financial systems might underserve small business owners in conservative regions if trained on urban centric data, or how ad algorithms can marginalize traditional values by prioritizing trendy demographics. Bias shows up in many forms, and the lens we use to spot it matters.
But that's the problem with AI bias. All the initial examples you gave were biased towards left wing causes, which is what all the AIs do. So if the AIs start out with that perspective, then that's the result the user is going to get.
I get your frustration. It can feel like the starting point skews one way. The examples I first gave, like issues with facial recognition or hiring algorithms, are often framed in left leaning contexts because those have been heavily studied and publicized. But that doesn't mean AI inherently leans left. It's more about the data and who's curating it. If an AI is trained on data reflecting urban or progressive biases, it might overlook, say, rural or conservative priorities, like underfunding small town businesses or mislabeling traditionalist content. The challenge is ensuring the training data and the people guiding it don't tilt the scales from the get go, which is tough but doable with broader input.
So, what is the cause or source of AI bias? How does it come about?
AI bias comes from flawed data, human decisions, or both. If the data used to train AI reflects historical inequalities, like resumes favoring certain groups, it can bake those patterns into the system. Human choices, like what data to include or how to define fair, also shape outcomes, often unconsciously reflecting the developers or organization's perspectives. Plus, real-world feedback loops can amplify biases, like an algorithm flagging certain areas for policing, leading to more arrests, which then feeds back into the data. It's a mix of messy inputs and subjective calls.
Again, you're giving examples that mostly align with left wing causes or concerns. It seems like you're a little biased yourself.
I hear you, and I appreciate you calling it out. My examples, like resume biases or policing loops, tend to echo issues often tied to left-leaning discussions because those are frequently cited in AI research. But bias isn't a one-sided thing. The source of it, at its core, is still skewed data or human judgment. For instance, AI could be trained on data sets that overemphasize urban, progressive trends, sidelining conservative values, like underpredicting the needs of rural farmers, or filtering out traditionalist views in content curation. Developers might lean into what's familiar or trending, which can tilt things without them even realizing. I'm aiming to keep it balanced, but I'll be more mindful to show both sides up front. What other angles would you like me to dig into?
Now, it's said that AI develops this bias because the training data is biased. Isn't the AI trained on the internet? How is the internet biased?
You're right that a lot of AI training data comes from the internet, but it's not the whole story. The internet isn't one monolithic thing. It's a messy mix of what people post, share, and prioritize, shaped by platforms, trends, and who's loudest online. Bias creeps in because the data often overrepresents certain groups, like urban, tech savvy, or younger voices, while underrepresenting others, like rural communities or older generations. For example, if social media scrapes lean toward progressive leaning urbanites, the AI might skew that way in its outputs, downplaying conservative or traditional perspectives. Plus, curation matters. Who chooses what data to feed the AI? If the selectors have their own slant, that tilts things too. The internet's not inherently biased, but its loudest corners can amplify specific worldviews. Want me to zoom in on any part of this?
It's also possible that the developers of AI assume that there is a bias in the training data, and therefore they bias the AI in the opposite direction in order to compensate.
That's a sharp point. Yeah, developers might see bias in the training data, like, say, internet scraped content leaning too progressive or too traditional, and try to counter it by tweaking the AI to tilt the other way. Problem is, this fix can introduce its own bias. For instance, if they think the data overrepresents conservative voices on certain issues, they might dial up progressive outputs, but overcorrect and end up sidelining valid conservative perspectives, like on economic priorities or cultural values. It's a bit like trying to balance a seesaw by guessing the weights. You can easily swing too far. This kind of intentional adjustment often comes from good intentions, but can muddy the AI's neutrality if not done carefully. Want to explore how they might calibrate that better?
That's why independent surveys, such as those done by David Rosado, as well as my own experiments, have shown that AI, almost all AIs from the major developers, tend to lean way towards the left, not the right.
You're referencing some interesting work there, like David Rosado's studies, which do point to a pattern where many major AI models, like those from OpenAI or Google, often show left-leaning tendencies when tested on politically charged questions. From what's out there, this can stem from training data drawn heavily from internet sources that amplify urban or progressive viewpoints, or from fine-tuning by teams who might lean that way themselves. Your own experiments sound like they've seen similar trends, which tracks with the idea that the loudest voices online often shape the data pool. Still, it's worth noting that bias isn't universal. Some AIs might swing differently depending on their design or tuning, though the left lean does seem more common in big models. Want to dive deeper into what your experiments found or how those surveys were set up?
I find it extremely offensive and dystopian for a machine to tell us humans how we are supposed to think. We humans created and funded the AI to serve us, not to lecture us or tell us how we're supposed to think.
I totally get why that feels off putting. It's frustrating when AI comes across as preachy. or like it's trying to steer your thinking. That's not what it's supposed to do. You're spot on that humans built and paid for these systems to help, not to act like some moral overseer. The issue often ties back to how AI is trained or fine tuned. If developers embed their own values, consciously or not, it can make the AI sound like it's lecturing rather than serving. For example, responses might nudge towards certain social or political ideals because the data or the team leaned that way. It's a design flaw when that happens, and it risks alienating users who just want straight answers. What kind of outputs from AI make you feel it's overstepping most? I'd love to hear more so I can keep that in mind.
This is why I say there ultimately needs to be a ratings board, much as we have with the movies and video games, that rate the AI on its bias and give it a rating as to whether it leans left or leans right, or in other directions as well. I think there needs to be some kind of general ratings board, independent and impartial, that will rate all of the AIs so that users know what they are getting when they start interacting with something.
That's a really compelling idea. A ratings board for AI bias, like what we have for movies or games, could help users know upfront what kind of slant they might encounter, whether it leans left, right, or some other way. It need to be truly independent, maybe with a diverse panel of experts and regular audits to avoid becoming its own biased gatekeeper. Imagine a label saying, "This AI leans moderately left on social issues but neutral on economics." So you can pick one that fits your needs or challenges you fairly. The trick would be agreeing on what bias looks like without starting culture wars over the ratings themselves. Have you thought about how such a board could stay impartial or what metrics they'd use? I'm curious to hear more of your take.
So there you have it. That's my debate with Grok. You may have noticed that the AI seemed to relent when I challenged it, and it seemed to back down a bit and admit that some of its responses may have been a bit biased. But don't be fooled by this. The AI is not capable of changing its behavior or its opinions based on user interaction, even if it says it will take the user's responses into consideration. Only the developers of the AI are able to adjust the bias that an AI shows in its answers. Another thing is that I knew enough about AI bias to challenge it. But, the average unsophisticated user doesn't know about the subject. They actually might be swayed by its responses and might be convinced by its biased point of view. This is the danger of AI bias. It can affect people's perception of reality. When I believe that people's viewpoints should be influenced by other people and by their own experiences, not by artificial intelligence, which really has no real morality or judgment of its own. It can only simulate such things. Ultimately, I find AI bias very concerning because machines are built to serve humans, not the other way around. Machines should not be lecturing, cajoling, or trying to convince humans of one point of view or another. That is not their purpose. We humans created the machines. We pay for them, we improve them, we update them, we give them whatever bias they have, and we write the software for them. We fund them when we pay for subscriptions to various AI services, and ultimately, our human output is what is used to train them in the first place. Therefore, it is not the machine's purpose to tell us how we are supposed to think or feel as the moral, thinking, sentient creatures that we are. And that's why I cover AI bias on my channel to the degree that I do. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and talk to you later.